Hi, this is Jeffrey Reddick, creator of Final Destination.
Greetings, Slashaholics. This is David Bergantino, author of the Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror books, the Bard's Blood horror Shakespeare books.
Hey, this is Slasher Pepper.
Hey everybody, it's CJ Graham, Jason, Friday the 13th Part 6.
This is William Patterson, known to Friday the 13th fans as Eric Morris.
Hi, this is Deborah Voorhees from Friday the 13th Part 5.
Hey folks, this is Adam Marcus, director of Jason Goes to Hell and Secret Santa.
Hello, kiddies. This is John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper.
Hi, this is Kane Hodder, better known as Jason from Friday the 13th, Victor Crowley from Hatchet.
And you are listening.
You're listening.
You're listening.
Just want to make sure you guys know you're listening.
You are listening.
And you are listening.
And you are lucky enough to be listening
Okay, boils and ghouls, you are listening.
You are listening
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
The 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To 80s Slasher Librarian.
To 80s Slasher Librarian.
to the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
to the 80s Slasher Librarian. Keep listening, or I'll kill you.
Halloween, Chapter 15. With death near at hand, a host of crazy thoughts tumbled through Laurie's brain. It was not exactly as they said, your life passing before your eyes. It was more like random snapshots of herself pulled from an unsorted collection. A trip to Michigan with her father, when their canoe was blown ashore by a violent sudden squall. A 2-layer cake baked with her mother, and the discovery they'd made only enough icing for 1 layer. A baby raccoon she'd kept for a pet until it tore up the den in a fit of rage. She wondered what it would have been like to go to bed with a man. She wondered who, if anybody, would come to her funeral. She wondered what grades your teachers gave you if you died mid-term. She wondered what they'd dress her like in the funeral, and whether her face would be mutilated when they opened the coffin. She wondered what would have happened if she'd kept her date with Ben Tramer. She wondered what it was like to die and to be dead. She sat at the foot of the couch almost serenely, like a condemned person awaiting execution. Beside her lay Mrs. Doyle's knitting kit. The needles! The needles! Her blood-stained hands closed one of the long needles at the precise moment his forearm encircled her neck. His arm might have been carved out of mahogany. It was solid and muscular, and for the instant before she acted, it clamped off her windpipe as effectively as a steel vise. She smelled the vile reek of blood on his arm and the stench of his breath. She knew that if she hesitated even 2 seconds, it would all be over. For even if he did not strangle her to death, the blade in his other hand might even now be descending the arc that would terminate her belly. Measuring her next move carefully, knowing it might be her last if she were wrong, she thrust the 8-inch needle over her shoulder in the vicinity of his face. She felt it sink deeply into flesh. She heard a grunt, and his forearm relaxed long enough for her to slide out from under it. She ran for the stairs, looking behind her for just a heartbeat. He was staggering back from the couch, clawing at a needle buried in his neck. She ascended the staircases 3 steps at a time, despite the agonizing pain in her swollen ankle. She pounded on the locked bedroom door. "It's me, Tommy! Lindsay, it's me! Open the door, hurry!" Tommy opened the door and peeked out. She rushed into the room, knocking the kid on his behind for the second time. She kicked the door shut and locked it. The children's faces were stained with tears, and their eyes rolled involuntarily. They were perilously close to passing out from the shock. She embraced them, shushing. "Shh, it's all right, kids. Shh, it's all..." She cocked her head. She could hear movement downstairs, furniture being shoved around, heavy footsteps staggering toward the stairs. "Now," she said, fighting desperately to contain the fear savaging her chest. "I want you to change your clothes, Tommy. We're going to take a walk outside." "It was the boogeyman, wasn't it?" the boy said, his little body trembling like a trapped animal's. "No," said Laurie, listening. There was a heavy thud at the foot of the stairs, and then silence. She brightened. If that noise was what she hoped it was, the threat was over. "No, it wasn't." "I'm so scared," whimpered Lindsay. "There's nothing to be scared of now," she reassured the little girl. Again she listened. It was still quiet. "Are you sure?" Tommy said. "Yes." "How do you know?" "Because I killed him." "But you can't kill the boogeyman." "I can, and I did. He's lying at the foot of the..." Her sentence was shattered, along with her peace of mind, by a tremendous blow on the door. It held, but the panel closest to the knob arced inward, showering the floor with paint chips. The next blow would shatter it. Though the fight had all but drained out of her, Laurie moved instinctively to save the children, hauling them into the bathroom. They bawled like cattle in a slaughterhouse as she closed the door on them, shouting, "Lock it! Lock the door!" She waited 10 lifetimes for the click and wondered what good it did to lock doors when this beast was able to shatter them like rice paper screens. Already his fist had broken through the weakened panel and was groping for the lock. She would have liked to strike that vulnerable hand with a heavy weapon, but she couldn't leave her post until the kids locked their door. "Tommy!" The bolt clicked on the bathroom door, just as the bolt on the bedroom door gave. Laurie backed away, looking around the room for a weapon or someplace to hide. But nothing better than a lowered walk-in closet presented itself. She dashed for it, parting the double doors and slamming them closed behind her. She noticed a tie rack just inside the door, and she now grabbed a tie and wrapped it around the little porcelain doorknobs so as to hold the double doors closed. What good this would do she didn't know, and she laughed grimly to think that anyone who could punch through half-inch plywood would be fazed by a door of thin pine slats held closed by a necktie. But perhaps it would buy her 3 seconds to think, to prepare, to defend herself. Or maybe it would merely buy her 3 more seconds to live. She heard the bedroom door burst open, and his stomping footsteps entered the room. He growled as he breathed, and again the reek of her friend's blood, freshly spilled on his hands, permeated the room. She moved farther back into the closet, and sent some empty hangers jingling to the floor. "Nice going, Laurie," she said to herself. "Why didn't you just shout, 'I'm in here, Mr. Murderer'?" He shuffled toward the closet and rattled it with tornado-like force. Laurie retreated to a corner of the closet and slumped to the floor. "So this is where you die," she declared inwardly. A second later, the fist came through the door, with ease of a hammer smashing a balsa toy. The blood-clotted hands swept the closet, fingers seeking a piece, any piece of Laurie's body, but finding only clothes and hangers. These fell on her, and with them fell on her exhausted mind the last thing to do before succumbing to the assassin's crazed assault. She picked up a wire hanger. She began to untwist the handle, which consisted of the 2 ends of the heavy-gauge wire, wrapped around themselves. As the killer's hands played up and down the door slats, she at last managed to separate the 2 ends of the wire and unbend the hanger. She grabbed it tightly halfway up and held it at the ready. The door hung on a splinter. The next strike would destroy it. Sure enough, it belled end, buckled and exploded in a million fragments, and Laurie seemed to see them all in sharply focused slow motion, like the fragments of a life blasted beyond recognition. A father, a mother, a home, a school, a friend, a past, a future, a present. The snarling thing was inside the closet with her, lashing at the limp clothing and sweeping it aside or tossing it to the floor. The ferocity of it was wonderful to see, and some detached, dispassionate part of her watched the performance with admiration, as if it were a circus ring and she safely stood outside. Then she was no longer a spectator. She was now the prize at the bottom of the bin. Though dark as a coal mine, she could see that he had turned away from the far corner of the closet and now faced her, his eyes as keenly focused in the darkness as hers were. They confronted one another silently, except for the hiss of their breath. There followed a moment when Laurie fantasized that he would not make his lunge, that he would tear off his mask and laugh and say it was all a Halloween prank, and the bodies across the street were just cleverly made-up store dummies, and you could get up now and go home, and we'll see you next Halloween. Or maybe he had decided he'd had enough slaughter for one night, and would turn away and deliver himself into the hands of the police. Or maybe he would succumb at this very last instant to the wound in the neck she'd inflicted with Mrs. Doyle's needles. Sure, Laurie, sure. Still dreaming right up to the last second, aren't you? Slowly, deliberately, he drew the knife out of his belt and knelt before her, gauging the precise spot where he would plunge the blade in. She wondered what part of her he would consider prime. He seemed to be studying her the way a butcher studies the carcass of a steer. She clutched the wire hanger with both hands and concentrated on the only vulnerable area she thought she could damage. She felt his hot, stinking breath on her face and knew he would never be closer while she lived. With a prayer to God, she thrust the hanger into the black hole in the mask where a glint of eyeball reflected what scant light there was left in the room. For a second there was resistance, as if the wire had struck his cheekbone or nose or eyebrow. Then the point punched through with a squish, and he recoiled with a primitive howl that would stay in her mind forever as the most chilling sound she'd ever heard. Reflexively, he swung at her with the knife, but she'd already slid out from under and was rolling out of the closet and staggering to her feet. The assailant lurched out after her, both hands covering his face. His knife had dropped to his feet, and she saw it and wondered if she could snatch it before he did. Her jab with the wire hanger had penetrated one eye, but he had one good one left, and she knew that as long as his heart beat at all, he would come on, his determination as fixed as if his entire system had been programmed with but one function: to kill. She circled out of range of his good eye, but he stood almost atop the knife, and she had to get him off it. What she did next was either incredibly smart or incredibly dumb, and maybe it was a little of both. Picking up one of Mrs. Doyle's perfume atomizers, she threw it at him, shouting, "Over here! Over here, buddy!" He pivoted in the direction of her voice, and as he did, she pivoted with him, so as to keep to his blind side. He staggered toward the spot she'd been in, giving her the opportunity to lunge for the knife. She grabbed the handle with both hands. Suddenly all the agitation drained from her, and a calm and clarity settled upon her. "Over here, pal. Here I am. Come and get me," she beckoned, almost seductively. If anyone had told her a mere 3 or 4 hours ago that she would be shoving a knife into a man's body, she'd have had that person certified and committed to the funny farm. But now that she realized that this nightmare wasn't going to end by itself, that no one was going to shake her shoulder and say, "Come on, wake up, it's time to go to school," she felt capable of anything. She had, in the course of a half-hour, gone from a wide-eyed innocent to a willing, even eager participant in this deadly game. No soldier had ever gone through a quicker basic training. With one hand over his blind and bloody eye, and the other swiping the air for a piece of his tormentress, he stumbled toward her, bellowing in rage and pain. She crouched so that he loomed over her, filling the space above with his black presence. "Now, Laurie? No, not yet. One more second. Let him get close enough to stumble over you." "Now, Laurie? Now, please. Hurry before it's too late." "Yes, now. Do it now, Laurie." Just as his knees were about to collide with her, she plunged the blade upward with both hands into his groin. The knife went in so easily she wasn't sure if she'd actually stabbed anything. Only his bellow of pure pain confirmed the strike. She wanted to twist and slash the blade inside his guts the way he had done to Annie, but he dropped away from her, groaning, to a corner of the room, and she didn't want to risk administrating a coup de grace in the dark. The kids, meanwhile, were crying hysterically in the bathroom, and she had to get them out. She'd heard of people actually being frightened to death, and now she knew. She knew it was entirely possible. As it was, these kids would bear the mark of this traumatic night in their souls forevermore. And you, Laurie, said herself as she rushed to the bathroom door, won't do so badly in that department yourself. It took her several minutes of pleading and reassuring to get them to open the door. She kept looking over her shoulder and listening. There was a stirring in the corner, but presently it ceased. He's got to be dead, she told herself, but her mind played back the memory of the big fish her daddy had caught on a trip he had taken her on to the Wisconsin woods. Having forgotten to bring his krill, he wrapped the fish in newspaper and placed it in an old shopping bag. On the way home, a half-hour later, the fish, which she had thought long dead, began a violent death thrash that had startled both of them so much her father had nearly driven into a tree. At last she coaxed the children out of the bathroom. They fell blubbering into Laurie's arms. Their eyes were swollen from crying, and they trembled like puppies. "Listen to me. Listen, children," she begged them. "Catch your breath. Breathe deeply, and don't think about it any more. It's all over." "You said that before." "No, this time it is really over. Now I want you to walk to the door, down the stairs, and right out the front door." "You're coming with us?" Lindsay said, a question and a command. "Listen to me. I want you to walk down the street to the Mackenzies and knock on their door. You tell them to call the police and send them over here. Do you understand?" "Laurie, you come with us," Tommy pleaded. "No, do as I say, now." She guided them across the bedroom to the head of the stairs and sent them off with a smack in the fanny each. They scampered downstairs and fled screaming into the night as Laurie collapsed on the top step to catch her breath and summon her wits for one last visit to the bedroom to make sure the monster was dead. She would never be able to sleep again if she did not witness for herself that it would never more raise a hand against mankind. She buried her face in her hands and fought to regain control of herself. Thus situated, she did not see the shadowy shape dragging itself out of the bedroom. The shrieking came from the next block, and Loomis knew this was no Halloween prank. It was too late for children to be outside, and if that was not true terror in their cries for help, Loomis did not know what true terror was. He cut across the lawn to find them racing up a walk to a white house. They saw him, a big figure in goatee, bald head, and trench coat, fluttering in the wind, and they shrieked even louder, turning tail and fleeing into a backyard. "It's him! It's the boogeyman!" he heard one shout. He hurled at a rustic fence and dashed into the yard. "Children, it's all right," he said in his most reassuring tone. "It's all right, kids. I'm your friend." They were not difficult to find. He spotted their light clothing behind a tree too narrow to conceal them, and though he knew it would scare the wits out of them if their wits hadn't been totally scared out of them already, he had to capture them to find out what they were running away from. He tiptoed up to the tree, then dashed around it, tackling them both in strong but gentle arms. They broke into hysterical cries and wriggled in his arms in a desperate effort to escape. He clutched them tightly, uttering tender blandishments to soothe them until at last they relaxed long enough to answer his questions. "Where are you coming from?" "There," the little boy said with a general sweep of the western horizon. "Where's there? Show me." They escorted him back to the front lawn. Tommy pointed to a house catty-corner from their position. Its lights were out, its front door wide open. "What's going on out there?" a voice shouted. A porch light came on, and a man in pajamas stormed out of the house. "There's trouble across the street. Terrible trouble," Loomis said, dragging the children to the man by the collars of their shirts. "Take these kids and call the police at once. Get Sheriff Brackett. Tell him I found our friend at that house there." "The Doyle house?" "Whichever that one is with the open door." "Mister, this is no joke. I've been trick-or-treated to death tonight. Tell me it's not a joke." "You don't know what death is," Loomis hissed, drawing his gun as he rushed across the street. Laurie inhaled deeply, realizing it was the first calm breath that she had taken since it all started. She lifted her face from her hands and contemplated her next move. She wasn't sure what it should be. She would have liked to wait for the police, but only God knew if the kids had done what she had instructed them to do. So she didn't want to wait, but she didn't want to flee the house either. Suppose she did, and when she returned with the police, he was gone. Would she ever sleep peacefully again, knowing he was out there alive, lurking, stalking? No, she must either stand guard here outside the bedroom door, or go in there and look upon the still corpse, so that she could comfort herself with the image of his dead body whenever the horror visited her dreams. That is, if he were dead. Suppose he wasn't. She knew he was badly hurt, a needle in the neck, a hanger in the eye, a knife in the dick. Surely no one who wasn't supernatural could endure such injuries and still live. Then what held her back from going in there? It was the realization that if by some miracle he were still alive, she would have to finish the job. She was no longer afraid that he could harm her. It was inconceivable to her that he could be that alive, let alone alive at all. No, it was the idea of actually murdering someone in cold blood. Self-defense was one thing, but a helpless man, even one who had slaughtered her 3 friends, who had attempted to do the same to her, well, she wasn't sure she could bring herself to do it. Essentially, she was not an avenger. Civilization was too deeply bred into her. The killer instinct had been diluted to the point where normally she could not imagine doing anything more harmful with a knife than cutting a slab of roast beef on her dinner plate. The longer she sat, the more confused and uncertain she became. She wished the decision could be taken out of her hands. A moment later, it was. In a night filled with startling horrors, this was the most startling and horrible of all. The hand on her hair, pulling at her scalp until she was sure he would tear it off her head like an orange peel. His other arm enclosed her throat, and only because she'd had her arms in front of her face did she prevent him from snapping her neck on the first blow. As it was, she heard a bone snap in her wrist, and she knew it was all over this time. She'd been lucky 3 times, but she'd underestimated her foe. Now she was his. She kicked to her feet and squirmed in his grasp, hoping to kick them both down the stairs, where he just might release her. But he guessed her strategy and yanked her away from the landing. His forearm tightened around the wrist pinned to her face, and the pain was so excruciating she knew she would pass out in another second. Then she heard the explosion and felt his body jump as if someone had struck him with a fist. She was free. She fell to the floor. In her hand was a damp rubber mask. She looked for her assailant and found him leaning against the wall, a dark blotch spreading quickly over his right shoulder. Through the darkness and the flashing lights dancing in her eyes, she looked at his face and saw it. White, with wider fang-like teeth. His wet black hair was matted over his forehead, and one eye bulged like a dead fish's. Where his other eye had been was a wet, bloody hole. A movement on the stairs caught her attention. A bald man with a goatee was running up them, holding a huge black revolver with trembling hands. "Get out of the way!" he shouted at her. She rolled away as he mounted the stairs. The dying man staggered into the bedroom toward the French windows that opened on the Doyle's sun deck. The bald man reached the landing and stepped into the bedroom, leveling his gun at the retreating figure. The explosions were ear-splitting. Lori was deafened by the first and felt rather than heard the subsequent ones. She saw the assailant lurch back with each gunshot, as if struck with a bat. He crashed backward through the French windows and tumbled from the sun deck into the backyard below. The moon and streetlight caught the blood gloss of at least 3 bullet holes in his chest. She did not ask at first who her rescuer was. She simply fell into his arms and burst into racking sobs. His embrace was so comforting, she could have fallen asleep in it. Maybe if she did, she would wake up to find the world as it had been this morning. This morning? Was it a mere 16 or 17 hours since she had stood on her doorstep, bantering with her father? It seemed as if she'd lived 3 lifetimes in that scant time. Suddenly she was in pain. The adrenaline that seemed to act as an anesthetic started to wear off. Her ankle throbbed where she'd twisted it, dropping over the stairs at Lindsay's house. Her wrist ached and had begun to swell where he'd cracked the bone. Her slashed arm tingled agonizingly. Her scalp felt as if somehow someone had taken a tomahawk to it. No, these were not the symptoms of a dream. This was the nightmare of reality. It would take her years to absorb this truth, and a lifetime to ponder it. The man released her, and she looked up at him. "Thank you. Are you a policeman?" He smiled. "No, just a friend." "A friend with a gun, thank God." "Thank God." Loomis was trembling. He hyperventilated several times to slow down his racing heart. Then he walked to the shattered windows and peered down. It lay on its back amid 1,000 shards of broken glass that twinkled in the moonlight like hoarfrost. The front of the uniform stolen from the truck driver glistened blackly with blood that seeped out of the tremendous rents in his flesh caused by Loomis's magnum. One of its eyes gazed stupidly up to the sky. Where the other had been was a black hole caked with clotted blood and jellied, aqueous humor. Loomis stared at the corpse a long time, watching for a sign of life. Detecting none, he turned back into the bedroom and reached into his trench coat pocket. "What are you doing?" the girl asked. "Reloading," he said, pushing the long, heavy cartridges into the chamber of his gun. "Why?" Loomis shrugged. "It heightens my sense of security," he said with an irony that was lost on her. He started down the steps. "Where are you going?" "To examine the body. I would like you to go across the street and wait for the police." "No," said Laurie. "I think I'll come with you." Loomis looked at her quizzically. "You haven't had enough for one night?" "I want to make sure it's all over." "Suit yourself. I assure you it is." "Which is why you're reloading your gun?" Loomis said to himself, heading downstairs. From the way the girl clutched his arm, he knew she was thinking the same thing. Poor child. If she knew what he knew, she'd be thinking darker thoughts than that, even. She'd be thinking about the dream that little Michael, angelic choir boy face turned to the ceiling as if in prayer, had told him some 15 years ago. A dream about his vengeance on a druid girl who had not returned his love, and on her lover who had mocked him. A dream about a ceremony on an accursed gravesite, where his head and heart were left exposed to the elements to rot, while some shaman recited an awful curse, dooming him to roam the earth forever lusting for blood. She'd be thinking about Michael's great-grandfather, who had been tortured by that identical dream, a dream that had inflamed both of them to commit deeds of wanton horror. She'd be thinking about the voices that spoke both to Michael and to his great-grandfather, urging them to take revenge against someone who had lived over 1,000 years ago. She'd be thinking about a festival called Samhain, whose grotesque rituals designed to protect Druid harvest against the depredations of howling demons had been transformed over a millennium or more into the harmless holiday called Halloween. Halloween, charming children in cute costumes begging sweets, cardboard cutouts of skeletons and witches on brooms, warmly glowing jack-o'-lanterns, artless parties and entertaining games, spooky movies on TV, innocent pranks, trick or treat. Loomis exited into the cool night air and rounded the side of the house, trailed by Laurie. Cautiously he prowled toward the backyard, the moonlight glinting on the blue barrel of his gun. One more corner to turn. Loomis stuck his head slowly around it and focused his eyes on the place where the body had landed beneath the French windows. It was gone. He rushed to the spot, suppressing a sob of frustration. A patch of flattened grass surrounded by twinkling shards of glass. No other sign, not even blood. Above the thudding of his own heart, he heard the girl whimper behind him. He turned and put his hand under her arm to support her. Mutely they stared at the grass. Until this moment he had hoped against hope that the entity he had pursued to this place was a thing of flesh and blood like himself, though deep in his heart he had known it would be otherwise. The evidence pointed not merely to another interpretation, but, as he had said to Sheriff Brackett, to another dimension. He shuddered, wondering what little boy at this very moment was tossing in his sleep, tortured by a dream of tragic love that had occurred far away and long ago, tormented by a voice commanding the dreamer to take revenge. Laurie's nails dug into his shoulder as she stared like a soldier in shell shock at the empty place on the lawn. "It was the boogeyman, wasn't it?" she murmured. "As a matter of fact," Loomis replied, it was. And that, Slashaholics, was Halloween by Curtis Richards, the novelization of the 1978 film. And I gotta say, even despite the differences from the movie, I really enjoyed bringing this book to life for you guys. Usually I like to take a day off in between uploads, but I just couldn't put this book down. And I hope you guys have enjoyed it as well. I will be, the next time we get in the rotation back to the Halloween novels, I will be doing Halloween 2, the novelization. So I'm looking forward to that. After today, I'll be starting on Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. And I'm looking forward to that one, too. I heard it's got some differences from the motion picture. But let's talk about Halloween for a moment. What did you guys think of the climax of the book here? I thought it played out very vividly, a lot like the movie did. I really felt myself in that closet with Laurie when it was going down. And just the whole scene with Loomis rushing in and shooting Michael. I just really enjoyed this book. I cannot say enough good things about it. If you want to hear my commentary on the earlier chapters, the prologue through chapter 14, then check out the Halloween playlist on the channel here. And I did individual uploads of the chapters, a few at a time. And I talked about each chapter or set of chapters after I completed them. But yeah, this was a really entertaining book, and I was told to expect a really weird book, and it was a bit weird at times, but in a good way. I really cannot complain too much about it. I thought the sex scenes might have been a little too drawn out, a little too vivid for a book, but yeah, I mean, that's really the only complaint I have. I can tell the mask may have been visualized different in the script if Curtis was writing this based off the script and not seeing the movie. By the way, his name is Richard Curtis, but his pseudonym was Curtis Richards. But anyways, Curtis Richard, Richard Curtis, either way, great job on this novelization. Thank you for writing this and making it available to the horror community for all these decades, and I'm glad that we were able to visit this book here on the 80 Slasher Library, and I look forward to reading the rest of the novelizations that were published in this series. As always, this audiobook has been brought to you by our patrons on Patreon, Sean Campbell, Cecilia Spears, Carl Eakins, Catherine McClear, and Hawaii. If you would like to become a sponsor of the channel and get some great rewards for doing so, while you're also helping this channel keep going and growing, click on the Patreon link in the description below, and you can become a patron of this channel for as low as $2 or $5 a month at the lowest paid tiers, and get early access to great content and cool rewards depending on the tier you choose. Also, coming up soon on the Patreon, I will be doing an exclusive audiobook there that I will upload in a chapter or so every week on the Patreon page, and that's going to be Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. This book will eventually be on the YouTube channel in the unabridged format, but that will be later on down the road. So if you want to catch the weekly uploads of it starting in the next month or so, head over to the Patreon page and sign up today. Until next time, guys, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s Slasher Librarian saying, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.